Hello, and welcome to Right in Front of My Face podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Hull, and today's episode continues with this theme of pivots during COVID with my next guest, Dr. Ashwin Rao, professor at University of Washington School of Sports Medicine. Fun fact, he is the only guest who has aspirated and injected 3 of my joints. I found Dr. Rao through a physical therapist. I won't bore you with the gory details, but Dr. Rao has helped me recover from a couple of different injuries. After my last set of injections with him, he took a few minutes with me to chat about what was going on in his department. There's something you should know about Dr. Rao. He's chatty, but not in an annoying way, in the endearing way where he lets you into his life while getting to know about yours. Like he's actually empathetic and curious about the world around him. He genuinely cares. Standing in the lobby of the UW Sports Medicine Clinic, I'd asked him about working with the Seahawks and whether or not he was going to continue being a team physician. And the answer he gave me that day after my appointment led me to wanting to record his answer to share with the world. His vulnerability and huge heart make him easy to get to know, but his humility is what sets him apart. It's not every day I get to speak to a leader in the field, and this was a very good day. Thank you for giving this podcast your time today. You are clearly way busier than I thought on your admin day.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I want to introduce you to my listeners. With me today is Dr. Ashwin Rao. He is many titles, but this is Professor Ashwin Rao now also.
Correct.
Will you please give your titles and make sure, because what I saw, I don't think is totally updated.
Yeah. So I'm Ashwin Rao. I'm a physician in sports medicine at the University of Washington. What that means effectively is that I have a clinical role where I'm seeing patients in clinic, and as a physician like you might expect one to see.
But you are board certified in both family and sports medicine.
Correct. So in sports medicine, you can come from a number of disciplines, and my core training was in family medicine with a subspecialty in sports medicine. But in truth, what I really do is primarily sports medicine, though the family medicine part becomes really important in the delivery of care from my belief system. That's how I believe it's important to have both skill sets.
So I found you after an injury that I had, and you are my only guest that has injected multiple joints of mine. But I found you to be one of the most kind, caring doctors I've ever had the privilege of working with. And so I've kept going back to you with my multiple injuries.
And I appreciate that.
But you're also chatty and willing to talk to me. So I found out that you are also team physician for the Seattle Seahawks.
Correct.
You are team physician for list all of the sports at University of Washington.
Yeah, so I take care of the baseball team, the women's soccer and the women's basketball team, as well as the football team there. So I've given up my role with the Seahawks as of July of 2021 to focus more on the college athlete effectively.
So I find your dedication to these collegiate athletes incredible because UW is a D1 school. There are a lot of athletes that have made playing sports their life's work. And these are young kids coming into this machine that is University of Washington. And what struck me as you were sort of sharing your experience is you are taking care of them.
Yeah.
From a mental health standpoint, from a physical standpoint, like the way that you were speaking about these athletes really touched me because they are kids and they're coming in and being asked to do so much mentally and physically that I thought, oh my gosh, there's a whole sports medicine clinic at UW that's dedicated to these incredible athletes.
Yeah, I mean, correct. I think that one thing that I came into medicine to do was to try to practice with empathy. And I think the way that I look at that is when I was a young person trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life, I knew that I always wanted to care for people. And I had a strong suspicion that I was going to be a physician early on, but that takes a lot of work to get through and to actually actualize. And what I saw was that along the way, a lot of people who all had very similar feelings to me, were sort of shedding the vestiges of that desire to want to help, for better or for worse. Some people were going into research, some people were going to very technical skill, jobs. But at the end of the day, I felt that I wanted to preserve that feeling of wanting to care for somebody. And so my career has really been dedicated to that in some ways. And if that's the person like you coming into clinic and you have an injured body part that needs to be fixed, I try to understand not just the problem, but the person. And it takes a little bit of time. You might have noticed that I don't type when I'm talking to my patients. I don't sit there in front of the computer because I think a lot of the communication is nonverbal. And you want the person who's with you to feel like they have your entire intention, their entire attention. So I think that that's something that's very important. And it's the same with college athletes as well. They're vulnerable and they need help in that moment to help them navigate at least one part of that challenge, which is their healthcare.
Well, and I think a lot of them are away from their families. They don't have a traditional support system of an adult that's there to kind of help guide them. And they need to make decisions about their healthcare and about their bodies and about the way they're going to function. But I want to go back to a conversation because, to your point of taking time, you've always taken so much time with me, but through kind of asking you questions, you were telling me about the athletes that come in that get taken care of by people that don't look like them.
Yeah. This is an area that I have a very strong passion about. And I came into sports medicine as essentially the only person of color in the practice that I ended up joining, which is an academic practice at the University of Washington, which is considered one of the top sports medicine training programs in the country. And as I looked at the landscape of sports medicine and who was taking care of our student athletes and our professional athletes, that was a group of I would just say a largely homogenous group of individuals, and largely male, largely white. And when I was having conversations with individuals, some would, with athletes, some would really just say, hey, the reason I'm coming to you is because I feel like you can relate to me. And it was always interesting to me because my heritage is of Indian ancestry. So I have darker skin, but I'm not African American, Afro-Caribbean. I'm not necessarily that, but just based on how I look made me more relatable. And so that got me thinking a little bit about what does it mean to be relatable to the person you're caring for? And what I recognize is I may not be relatable to everybody who comes and seeks my care. But as a member of a faculty that is responsible for training the future of sports medicine, I thought it was important to start to pursue trying to make the future physician workforce in sports medicine, so basically future physicians, amongst many others, more representative in terms of diversity to the athletes who they care for.
So this has been sort of a mission of yours from the time you started at UW.
I would say it's a mission that developed over time, to be honest with you. And honestly, some of it comes from luck, some of it comes from conversation, and some of it comes from deep thinking. And so the luck part came from several years ago, connecting with another faculty member at the University of Virginia who was very, very passionate about one of her trainees who is now on our faculty at sports medicine at the University of Washington. And that individual came and spent 2 weeks with us with the intent of considering our program. And she was a Black woman, and she was amazing. Regardless of her color, creed, ethnicity, she was a fantastic physician. And so it got me to think a little bit during that year that she was with us to complete her sports medicine training about what it meant to train individuals such as her and how important that was in the grand scheme of all the other competing interests that one might factor into delivering good training. And it was soon thereafter that we were dealing with some of the George Floyd situations, the police brutality issues that were sort of coming to light. And in that context, I was taking care of the Seahawks, many of whom were very politically active individuals such as Doug Baldwin, Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, others who were out in the community having these conversations.
Well, I mean, actually believe how relevant this conversation is
Yeah.
even now, just with what's happening in the NFL.
Yes.
And this one brave coach who is saying, you know what, this is worth me risking my entire career for.
Absolutely. And I've had these conversations with others in the league, essentially more or less saying very similar things, that it's a challenge that to navigate the NFL as an athlete, let alone as a coach, when you're a person of color. And there's a lot of disparities that from the outside in, once you start paying attention to them, are pretty stark. And one of those is, being a Black coach. But there are other disparities too. And it starts to make you wonder when, your workforce, the people who are playing at the most elite level, who might know the sport the best as players, don't seem to have many opportunities beyond their playing careers to go into coaching, or at least at coaching at the head coach level. And so I think that those are all challenges that need to be sussed out, but it's something that's very clearly evident. There's one Black coach in all of and pro football right now, I think, or at least NFL football. Mike Tomlin is the only Black coach. And this is a conversation that's been had in many versions over many years. And unfortunately, it seems like progress continues to stall. And so I think it's very interesting that Brian Flores said that he was essentially litigating for change rather than for money. He wasn't and is not looking for a financial recuperation or remuneration. He's looking for effective strategies for change. And we're thinking a lot about that in sports medicine, is how do you affect change, and how do you create diversity within departments where academics are often slanted by who you know and how connected you are, and how do you change your physician workforce in the setting of that type of scenario. It's challenging, and I'm working on it. So,
well, I went in to have my knees aspirated by you and your wonderful fellow. And when she walked in, Dr. Megan Burleson,
correct,
is a young Black woman, and she was phenomenal. She is also an athlete. Yep. And it made me so happy to see her as the future of sports medicine. I totally trusted her from the second I saw her. But as, a white woman, I only, I have limited visibility into what that would feel like to go through the system of being an athlete and then deciding, hey, I want to do this, and then continuing to come up against barriers. But it was so awesome to realize that I want that to be the future of medicine. But I want you to tell me quick shout out to Dr. Megan, because you're great.
Megan's awesome.
But, and also like creed, color, all of it aside, she was amazing to work with, and gentle and kind, and her follow-up was amazing. But I want to go back a little bit, because you started at UW, you're double board certified, you do all this, you start working with the Seahawks along with the Husky football team, and you're seeing these athletes not have anyone to go to who looks like them. Now, you are not without ambition in your own professional career.
Correct.
So kind of tell me about how this road led you, because you did have to make a decision whether or not to stay and do exactly what you're saying, which is create a systemic change within a system, or move on to other pro sports that are really, those are high profile jobs, and they're hard to get.
Yeah. I was considered for a job with another professional sports team that was arriving in Seattle a couple years ago. And it was
no one will guess who that is.
No, nobody would guess who that is. And it was with a different healthcare system managing the partnership and the medical care than the University of Washington. And so I would have had to leave essentially 19 years of effort and training and establishment at the University of Washington for a different healthcare system. Now, there were some benefits to that for both, in terms of like, hey, maybe there's a fresh start and a fresh perspective and a new place to sort of start afresh and build a program. But there was a lot of challenges as I got into considering that job, that despite sort of some of the benefits of, one, the privilege to take care of a professional team, two, the chance to build something from scratch rather than to build upon others' work, and three, to just try to, get paid well, more better to support my family. Ultimately, I came to the decision that the move wasn't correct for me because I was not going to be able to support my patients in the way that I would have hoped to do that. And that came about when I was negotiating the details of what I wanted and how I saw the job as playing out. And what I found was that in the system that I was negotiating with, the physician was not really going to be, that position at least was not going to be empowered to be a vehicle for change. The way it was set up administratively was one where you were reporting to a number of different people before you could even have a seat at the table. And some of the opportunities that I have at the university to care for athletes and patients such as you that I feel are essential to completing me and allowing me to have the skills and the tools necessary to essentially be me were off the table there. And so I had to make a decision whether I would make the compromise of being paid more, being more, sort of comfortable in some ways and taking care of a pro sports team, or simply continuing with my college sports and maybe having a greater role there, but being able to really care for my patients in a way that I felt would complete me and leave me satisfied. And, I kind of joked around at the time that money, the Beatles song, Money Can't Buy Me Love. And it's easy to always look for the better contract or the more financially lucrative deal. But at the end of the day, much of one's success is determined by the environment in which they practice. And that might be the people whom they work with, the training opportunities that I have to help others, the responsiveness of the system to work with my own interests and my own passions to carry out that vision was very much in place at the U. And so I was happy to stay where I was, despite from the outside what might have been an otherwise awesome opportunity.
Hey everybody, John Gruss with Element Mortgage here again, and we're still dealing with a pretty crazy real estate market, especially on the lending side. Interest rates are still incredibly low. So if you have not had an opportunity to refinance your current home yet, what are you waiting for? Rates are great. Reach out to us. We'll be happy to provide you your options. Secondarily, our homes are all increasing in value. Great chance to potentially tap into some of that equity by utilizing a cash out refinance option. Again, the rates are still incredibly low on that, and you've got an opportunity to tap into the equity for either home improvements, maybe some debt consolidation, whatever that additional cash may be beneficial for. Last, if you're buying a home, you've probably seen the news. It's crazy out there. The market is hot. What's going to be incredibly important is that you have a lender that can help you navigate this process by explaining what's going on, how to strategically position your offer so that it's accepted in a market where sellers are getting multiple offers on properties. And at Element Mortgage, we're happy to do that. We're licensed in 49 states. Sorry, New York. Unfortunately, we're not able to assist, but please reach out to me, John, Jon.Gruss, Grus, at elementmortgage.com or 206-954-4787. John Gruss, NMLS number 1108421. Element Mortgage is a division of American Pacific Mortgage, NMLS number 1850, equal housing opportunity.
And you took an opportunity to stay within academia because you are a professor.
It's correct. Yeah. And that's been a challenge. And that was actually one of the decisions I had was I have spent the past 19 years at the university working my way to the title of full professor. And there's only about 30 or so full professors of sports medicine in the entire country. It's not a title that is easily achieved because most sports medicine physicians are out in the community practicing. Yep. They're not trying to publish. They're not trying to do research or write textbooks. They're not trying to educate the futures of sports medicine physicians. They're really trying to take care of patients. And I have interest in those other things.
Which is pretty interesting too, because sports have changed. I mean, the Olympics are starting. You just watch these athletes. They're younger. They're machines.
Yeah.
They are different. I mean, athletics are changing. And
athletics
I would
changing.
imagine that their bodies are changing and that they need different care than they did 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think the technology and the necessity to change and the timelines are, I don't know if they're different or not, but the demands upon athletes have changed. And there's a drive to compete no matter what the injury, the illness, or circumstance that an athlete's in. And so some of that is trying to figure out how to achieve that in the face of difficult circumstances, such as a chronic injury. I tell a lot of my athletes that some of the procedures that I do will take them out of their training cycle. So it might be something that they need to seek after their Olympic sequence is over in terms of their training. But there are other ways to manage them. So this is where like the art of medicine comes in, where some of the treatments that I can offer don't necessarily achieve the end goal as quickly as they or I might like, but will not interrupt their training cycle. And so having an understanding of the person, their circumstance, their goals are all really, really important. Just as important to me as the percutaneous tenotomy device that I have, or the joint injection and aspiration that I can do, or the ultrasound I can take a look at a structure and then target that structure interventionally, might not be the right treatment for the person who says, well, that's nice, but if you do that procedure to me, it's going to interrupt my capacity to achieve my goals. So that is where the art of medicine really comes in, is to try to figure out, hey, I need to connect with this person, understand what's going on in their lives, so that I know that if the care that I can offer fits their circumstance.
So I brought you on because this season is all about COVID pivots. And I just want to point out that your pivot was away from a more lucrative career back to academia to really try to forward modern sports medicine in a myriad of ways. But what you're talking about is connection. And a piece of that is diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. This is something that's become very, very important to me. I don't know if legacy is the right word, but you always want to influence change in a meaningful way to those around you. And that might be the community at large. That might be just your family. There's a variety of ways to interpret that. But what I see is an opportunity in sports medicine to provide physicians the training that they need, and physicians who may not necessarily be identified as the person who's going to fit this particular role. So that might be Dr. Burleson. That might be Dr. Austin. That might be, any other person out there who is trying to figure out how to navigate getting into an academic career, but might not have the resources around them to do that. And so I started to think about that and saying, well, I want to make sure that our physician workforce is more reflective of the athletes for whom we care. And how can we do that? And from my perspective, in the academic sports medicine world, it's really focusing on training individuals to be excellent sports med physicians and to mentor them and to support them in an environment which allows them to be leaders. And so essentially I went from trying to look at, hey, what's the best cookie cutter fellowship trainee for our program, somebody who's well prepared for sports medicine. And I switched to thinking about who in our candidate pool are showing tremendous leadership potential.
Interesting.
And that allowed us to see our candidate pool in a very different way.
So you said something earlier before we started recording that I want to come back to because you just touched on it. You were talking about somebody needing to unlearn what they have learned. And I feel like you are sort of walking the talk of that with what you just said, because even being able to have the wherewithal to say, okay, hang on, let's look at our candidate pool to see. So for people that don't know, when you go into any sort of specialty, when you apply, you have to match.
You're correct.
So the school has to want you, you have to want the school. And it's a whole big, risky proposition, right?
Yeah, we have 150 candidates for one position.
Is that the number?
That's the number. About every year, there's about 150. For one spot that they can match into. So
Wow.
I review every candidate's packet. The way I've tried to keep a diversity of opinion on who we actually look at is I have an associate director, Dr. Siebert, and two other faculty, Dr. Nagel and Dr. Austin, who each individually review every candidate. We read, a 20, 30 page packet that's 3 or 4 letters of recommendation, a personal statement, and their CVs, along with a variety of other information, board scores, and we review everything and say, okay, of that 150, which 30 or so should we interview for the one spot?
That is incredible.
It's a challenge. But it's a challenge that I take extremely seriously. And I tell people, if you look at our fellowship website, we have video bios of all of our faculty to sort of inform people during this time of COVID. How do we deliver a sense of our program when we may not be able to interview people in person, because that's gone away because of COVID for the past couple of years? And then two, how do we give everybody on that candidate pool a fair shake at it? And not everybody is necessarily going to be the perfect fit for us or may not have the training, but we have to be careful about how we judge those candidates, because some of them we might miss and they may be fantastic candidates for our program, but unless we're looking in a fair and equitable way, we might be missing fantastic candidates.
So throw out the percentage you gave me about men versus women when you started.
Yeah. So when I started in sports medicine, approximately 80% of sports medicine physicians were male and about 20% were female. Now, in 15 years later, it's about 66-37. I think that's 66-33.
Is that within the UW system?
That's
or as
throughout
a whole?
The country.
Okay.
So some of that is reflective of the pool of candidates. There's more likely to be a male candidate applying than a female candidate. That's held up over time. And it begs the question of why. Because theoretically, with all kinds of systems in place, including Title IX, there should be equal numbers of male and women athletes. And so I've thought about not only how do we train physicians once they've gotten into the position to be a fellow in our program, but how do we start to mentor and support individuals at a much earlier level, say at the high school level? How do we identify individuals who might be interested in sports, but may not ultimately have a pro career, or maybe that's not their desire. They like sports.
Which is, by the way, probably 90% of athletes.
I know everybody believes they're going to have a pro career, but the fact of the matter is it's a brutal process. Like my daughter who plays club select soccer, she plays at a very high level. She plays on a premier team, but I have no aspirations or expectations for her to even compete at the college level, because I don't want to put that pressure on her. And if she drives it, great. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of other parents on the team that we play on that believe that their kid's going to get a college scholarship or play on the Reign or some other NWSL team or overseas. And the chances of that are minimal. I look at like the Crossfire Challenge, which has several thousand kids. And I look at that pool and there's going to be about 5.
Yeah. I mean, the pool is so big, but just taking soccer as its own little example.
As its own little bubble, let alone
and they're
sports.
All incredible. Like they're all incredible athletes.
Yeah.
But not very many.
Yeah. And it's challenging. And how do you take that person who may not have quite passed muster as the elitist of elite athletes, but has a strong passion to be in that space, is capable academically, is a person who might fit the system and the environment in which they're in to provide excellent care. And so it's saying, hey, that person who's interested in sports, who maybe is an elite athlete who gets injured, or somebody else who's in the space but is more of an academic than an athlete, how do you tell and identify that individual and say, hey, I want to support you in developing the skill set to be a sports medicine physician 15 or 20 years down the road? That's an interesting question. So we're looking at that question too, in terms of reaching out in the community, having our fellows go out and give lectures so they see that it's possible for people of color or minorities in sports medicine to be in a position where they can take care of others or give lectures and become familiar, or identify athletes at the STEM schools at underserved communities and say, hey, this is an individual who we can set up a scholarship for so they can come to hang out with us on the sidelines and see what it is like. Those types of activities.
It's so interesting because I can't think of anything more valuable than a doctor who has familiarity with the athlete's mindset, right? I played high school volleyball. That was like the end of my career. But once the Olympics for me is such a joy to watch because I love seeing athletes perform at their peak. I think there's nothing more beautiful. It's incredible. I really enjoy it. And they're not necessarily all in professional sports leagues, but there's a guy representing American Samoa who's a bobsledder. That is not an easy road, man. That is hard. And these people have so much, but there is a mindset that is not like normal people. Exactly.
We're several standard deviations from the norm there. Yeah. It's interesting. One of my patients ended up being my daughter's nanny for a couple years. Speaking to my own privilege, I guess, having a nanny. But she is a French Olympian. She ran at Rio and she's an 800-meter runner, graduated from Stanford. She became a patient of mine back in 2017, soon after, because she was struggling with an injury. And in helping her, I was talking about my own life, because that's part of how I connect, is I share my own life a little bit. And what she related to me is that as a Stanford graduate, one, she felt that as an athlete, she had sacrificed a significant opportunity to get the most out of her education at Stanford, where she would have already had a challenge to get into academically, but she got in, and felt that there were compromises to being an athlete and performing academically. And then as a professional athlete, she was essentially living below the poverty line, basically having a stipend from her federation in France, as well as a small pro contract that paid basically just to the level of poverty, basically.
Yeah.
And half of her day was spent training for a goal that was 3.5 years in the future. And she said that most distance runners competing at the elite level had to have a second job that was part-time, so they could spend half of their training and go to another job afterwards. So many, many professional athletes turn out to be nannies. And so I was like, well, if you know anybody, we need a nanny. And she's like, well, that might sound weird, but I actually am looking for a job like that. And she ended up being an incredible, incredible resource for my daughter, who now knows how to bake, who's an athlete herself, who has all these interests from this diverse, incredibly vibrant young woman athlete, who is not just an athlete, she's a person, but at the end of the day, she's an incredible human being who's become family to us. But just hearing about her struggle and understanding that this is somebody who ran at the Olympics. She was a Olympian and was trying to go for it again, and ended up actually having to retire thanks to the pandemic, delaying the Olympics, and her saying, you know what, I have to start my life. I'm about to hit 30.
It's so funny that you say this, because we refinanced our house a couple years ago, and the guy that came he was African-American, and he was tall and like obviously an athlete.
Yeah.
And he was wearing this beautiful wedding ring. And so I commented on the ring. So I'm like, your ring is so beautiful. Anyway, through talking, he is representing Trinidad and Tobago for track in the Olympics. He was, And I was like, are you kidding me? And he had gotten married, so he and his wife could go train in South Africa.
Yeah.
But to your point, what we are asking these athletes to do is crazy.
It's crazy. And many of them don't have resources. And I worry about the care that they get, because many of them have to seek the care of people who are looking to take advantage of them.
Yeah.
One of the benefits of being an academic sports medicine doc is my salary is not dictated by anything other than what my department pays me. It doesn't have to do with endorsements or like connections in the community. It's really, I do as I see fit based off of the environment I'm in, but I don't have to go and try to find marketing partnerships with athletes and maybe give them questionable care for free. And that is a lot of what many elite athletes have to kind of navigate, not really understanding the healthcare system, not knowing who's a good doc or not, just as a young 20-something person trying to figure out how to live life, let alone get decent care. And so it's a challenge for athletes.
I'm sitting here with Tracy Erickson of the Collective Group at Compass. Tracy, you are a great listing agent. I've seen a lot of homes that are listed by the Collective Group. Can you tell me a little bit about what's in your listing plan and how it sets the Collective Group apart from other agents?
Absolutely. You know, Shannon, there's so much more that goes into selling a home than just putting a sign in the front yard. And we really pride ourselves on that. One of the first things we'll do is walk through the home with the seller and advise on the best improvements. And then once we decide what type of work that we're going to do to give you the best ROI, you can hand those keys over and we will project manage the entire thing. Once we have your home looking its best, we will get it staged from top to bottom and have our amazing photographers come in and not only take photographs, but also do videos, drone shots, and even a Matterport. Once that's completed and we have it on the market, the marketing is huge. So we push social media advertising very hard. Our goal is always to achieve 10,000 views of your property on all social media platforms. So our commitment is always to our sellers in this hot Seattle market to get the highest dollar possible for their biggest investment.
Tracy, where can people find you?
They can find us at compass.com, or they can find us on Instagram, Tracy Erickson Homes, or feel free to give me a call, 206-251-6351.
I want to talk a little bit too about how your job has changed through COVID, because you are not just providing physical care. I want to hear a little bit about the mental health aspect of your job, because I do think the Black Lives Matter movement deeply, deeply affected the community of athletes at UW.
Absolutely.
I mean, I have to believe that.
Absolutely. You know, it's a complicated world in which we live for all the obvious reasons. It's a complicated world that we live in these days, and our athletes are challenged by physical and mental barriers. And I think that I became more and more aware of the mental health challenges in sports medicine based off of some of the research that I was doing, let alone all the different reporting that has been done on athletes dying by suicide and, taking their lives for various reasons. I became interested because I was actually looking in my early career research had to deal with sudden cardiac arrest amongst athletes and preventing sudden cardiac arrest. And I was mining a database of individuals who died of any cause in the NCAA. And there's essentially a list that's a memorial list that's published by the NCAA every year. It's called the Resolutions List. And it's supposed to be available to memorialize anybody who's passed from any cause who's in the athletic footprint. But if you look at that data, if you look at that list, you have to then go to the internet and try to find out why they might have passed if you're interested in that. We were initially interested in looking at sudden cardiac arrest to try to identify what is the athlete's risk, and is there a sports-specific risk to dying from a sudden cardiac arrest while playing sports. But as I got through that data, I started to see that essentially that was the second leading cause of death after accidents. The third and fourth leading causes of death in athletes at the college level were homicide and suicide.
Jeez.
Yeah. And so then it brought me to the question of, okay, that might be the case. And if that's the case, why aren't we thinking about this enough? And two, how do we think about this in the context of what athletic suicide or homicide looks like compared to the general population of collegiate age or the general population as a whole? And so I started looking at that question and figuring out that, yeah, athletes are in a very specific risk group. They actually might be protected from suicide and homicide because there's many more systems to protect them, like
Right.
coaching and all these things, but it's still an incredibly intense environment of racial tension, social disparity, coming into a circumstances, let alone at a college athlete where you actually are privileged in many ways to be there, but you're coming from often underserved backgrounds. Super complicated.
Well, and it's just the pressure.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you go to Husky Stadium and it is filled with
Yeah.
20,000 people expecting you to deliver. I mean, that
Yeah.
cannot be easy for an 18-year-old.
Yeah, and they'd rather have 70,000 there. Imagine being a 20-year-old individual on the sideline and somebody's screaming at you that you suck. And you have spent your entire life to get to that spot and perform enough and well enough amongst your 150 other teammates to be a starter on a Division I, essentially collegiate elite football team.
It really boggles my mind.
It's crazy.
The mental
Yeah.
game these kids have to play.
It's incredible. And how do you shield yourself? How do you, all of those things.
And then, but also then add COVID into it, where these athletes are, they are, as I said, the athletic mindset for an athlete is not the same as a regular person. So to take away that competition that literally feeds their soul.
Absolutely. This is something that was looked at pretty carefully in the early parts of the pandemic, and athletes were, I think, 5 times more likely to be depressed and suicidal than they were pre-pandemic. So you have to be aware and able to support them. You have to be aware that you need to ask about mental health. You need to ask how their home situation is if they're studying from home, if they're not able to play their sport.
So this is a piece of that leadership pie, though, because I mean, these kids are lucky that you are driving the bus for them and really thinking about that holistic mental piece of it. Do you think that is a unique factor of UW's sports medicine program?
Yes, in many ways, because I have a very directed interest in it. Not everybody does. And actually, there is research out there that suggests that physicians are not comfortable speaking about mental health. It's much easier, just like an athlete, to put tangible effort into a physical illness, be it rehab and recovery. I know I tore my ACL. When it gets to mental health concerns, it becomes a lot more difficult because you can't touch it necessarily, but it's right there in front of you.
Well, and so I'll use myself as an example because I started playing tennis on my, 2-5 cup team, but it has brought a great deal of joy to my life. I love it. My knees do not love it. And I played a match on Monday. Let's see, today is Friday. So I played a match on Monday and I have not been able to walk up and down stairs all week, but I won.
Yes,
and
right?
So, but that has been like, all right, well, we'll take that payoff. But for me, I look at that and I am really struggling mentally knowing that this one little thing that I like that I just started might not be doable for a few months. Yeah. But you look at an athlete who has their career on the line of something they're getting paid to do and that they love to do.
Yeah.
That is a tough deal, especially in the middle of a pandemic where you're like, sorry, you can't do this. Also, you can't really be around anybody right now.
Yeah.
Also, you have to wear a mat, you do all these things.
Yeah. You're wise to think this. I mean, I think that that's exactly what people are struggling with, and it's even more challenging when the sport that you have driven to be amazingly successful in, you're so pressured to perform at a peak level that you start to lose your joy. And then all of your social connections, your ability to interact with others is taken away or criticized or, looked upon very negatively because getting together in large groups might end up causing COVID outbreaks and you might be judged by your coaching staff or your medical staff or all that. And so when I talk to my athletes, I'm like, there's no judgment. I just want to know so I can take care of you. And last year we had a outbreak on one of the sports teams because a lot of the athletes got together for a Halloween party. And, I kind of get it. It's tricky. Most athletes in that circumstance are saying, well, I'm not going to see my family. I'm not going to see the people who are going to be more vulnerable. I want to see my friends. And if I get COVID, I get COVID. Like, whoop-de-doo, I'm young. And the flip side is, well, there are public health implications to that type of thing. And so how do you balance those two things in an empathetic way?
NCAA, there's a lot of money at stake in these games. So it's not, it's multifaceted because it's a public health issue, but also there's this other
a
piece
financial piece
that these kids are obligated to through no sort of fault of their own.
Yeah,
they're cogs in a machine in some ways.
Yeah, there's a reason there's 70,000 seats at Husky Stadium. And, it's amazing to me how much, just looking at the information, the highest paid state employee is usually the football coach at one of the Division I schools in the state. The two highest paid employees, higher than any of the litigators, higher than any of the politicians, higher than any of the people who are involved in government. It's the football coaches, and there's a reason for that. And as an athlete, to be in a circumstance is both a great honor, but also a great challenge, knowing that the people above them have a lot of power.
Yeah.
And, there's this huge power dynamic. And so trying to enter into a care relationship when you understand that there's the perception and probably the reality of a power dynamic takes a lot of work to kind of say, hey, we're people. You and I are here together and I'm here to support you. So I really try to give people a sense that I am there for them. And
so that's interesting though, because I guess I never really thought about it in terms of distrust, but I could see how an athlete coming in is like, your job is to make me able to make money for the school.
Yeah. I think where I felt like I saw that the most was honestly with my time at the Seahawks is because athletes were often on non-guaranteed contracts, recognizing that, if they missed a week or two, that was a huge paycheck, a huge financial hit. And now it was our responsibility as physicians and care providers to get them back as fast as possible. and having conversations to say, well, fast as possible may or may not be the best thing for your long-term health. And how do we balance your long-term health against your short-term health? Or how do we balance your long-term health when those health outcomes for short-term return are unclear, like in concussion, where somebody might clear their concussion test, but we don't know that having too many concussions might really have a huge impact on their long-term health.
Right.
So this becomes really complicated in terms of like, how do you support an individual in a circumstances where the pressure, the long-term financial implications, let alone collegiate, financial, all of these things kind of swirl together in a really complicated milieu. And you can imagine that somebody who's 20 years old trying to navigate that system and expected to make adult decisions without really the training or mentorship to do that is really challenging.
Yeah. And it makes your role even more challenging too. But I'm so thankful that these athletes have you and your team behind them, because I do think that's pretty unique. And the effort you are making to bring in doctors that can relate on a totally different level.
I think relationships are huge. To me, that's the key to all of this, is to be relatable and have a relationship. And that might mean different things. And one's race, creed, ethnicity, gender might be just as important as another factor that a physician deems as important, such as their knowledge base. And so trying to find ways to train people to a high degree at a high level to make their skill set more rounded out, if they happen to be more relatable, I think is important.
Well, also, you're not just relating to athletes, but you're relating to coaches. I mean, I wonder how often your opinions pit you against a coaching staff.
I would say the quick answer is that there are systems in place to try to limit that. So for example, it does happen from time to time. And in those circumstances, I often say, well, we're going to set up a lines for communication where you and I as coach and doctor don't have to talk all that often. And if there's a serious conversation that needs to happen about an athlete, then you have to find a way to have a conversation that doesn't bias you towards, say, a coach's intention when their medical decision-making might dictate otherwise. And so I tell my athlete, my coaches, that my goal as a healthcare provider on your team is to protect and take care of your athletes, not you as a coach. And so the coach's desire might be entirely different than what I think an athlete's desire is. And if I feel like the coach is pressuring me, I will let them know.
I mean, the strength, though, and confidence that you have to have.
It's something that comes with time. I can say that my role as a full professor at the university, having been successful for nearly 2 decades, helps me. I have 20 years of success and proof on paper, but the same version of me 15 or 18 years ago would not have felt comfortable necessarily. And I just
feel the need to point out that you are young.
Oh, well, thank you.
I mean, I say that because we're the similar ages.
Yes, we are.
So young.
We're young.
But I think having a young, strong voice like that, the coaches are older.
Yeah.
And it's tough to take.
It's interesting you say that. I look at I haven't actually met our current football coach yet, but I have other coaches that are, as we get older, they're getting closer to our age. I will say that, but I will also say that regardless of, for most of my career, the coaches have been older. And, what I have tried to do, what's interesting is that I have ended up being a lot of my coaches' physicians as well, just based on the nature of proximity. And I try to find a good relationship with them too, to be honest. And for example, with my baseball coach here at the university, I've been taking care of baseball for 13 years now, I believe, 14 years, something like that. And it's been the entire time this one coach, Coach Meggs, has been there. And I have been his family physician for the past 14 years. And there are times where he will come with me with questions about an athlete. And sometimes I'll have to say, Coach, this is HIPAA protection that I can't speak about. There are some instances where I can give him information if an athlete has said, I'm comfortable with you sharing that information. Mm-hmm. There are times where I say, Coach, this is an opinion that I feel very strongly about. And I know you want to have an athlete out there for a certain situation. And what's been great is with those 14 years of trust, and we've had many other staff members revolve during that time, including our athletic trainers who are more present from a day-to-day standpoint. Coach trusts me, and he trusts that I will make the right decision for both the athlete, but trying to factor in some level of context that this is a team sport and we need to try to keep our athletes healthy. So there is a balance there, but I would say that it comes with time, with effort, and with experience in many instances. And it certainly helps to be more experienced at this point in my career. I can say that because I feel the comfort of my experience when interacting with newer coaches who might not have as much experience with me.
I can't imagine the pressure that you're all under to deliver and having the strength of will to be like, we're going to protect these kids. And even if it means they, can't play or whatever that decision is. I mean, it is a pressure I think not very many of us will ever understand, being a Division I athlete, coach, or training staff.
It's a challenge. And it's especially a challenge when you might have to communicate to an athlete that continuing to play their sport might not be in their best long-term interests. And whether that might be somebody who has like a recurrently dislocating shoulder, say, or a really arthritic knee when they're 20 years old, or whatever it is. And you've decided at a certain point that it might not be safe for them to play another game. Those are incredibly challenging conversations with an athlete who's literally staring the end of their career in that room with you in that moment. And that's a responsibility as well. And trying to figure out how to navigate that and get individuals when you feel like, hey, this is not safe anymore, for you to support them. Or if it's going to take them a long time to get better, to kind of find a way to navigate the process with them so they come out of the process feeling comfortable and confident with their abilities again is also challenging. And there's great sacrifice there. There's great sacrifice in terms of being available to have those conversations at any given time. My wife she's like, you're always on. And I'm like, well, I kind of have to be. I've taken on the role and responsibility. But then the flip side is if I get a call from a trainer or coach and it's dinner time, I'm like, it's dinner time. Yeah. Like, this is not urgent. It's going to have to wait. And I have a coach that really likes to kind of dial in at any given time. And I've had to say several times, Coach, I told you when we met that family is my priority number one. And at the end of the day, I have tons of experience and I will help you, but not during dinner, unless it's a medically urgent matter. And so she understands, or he understands, that there are circumstances that I am living my life too, and trying to find that balance and navigating it and keeping things in the context takes away some of that pressure, because at the end of the day, I'm comfortable. I've been doing this a long time. And when you ground yourself in your own life and family and saying, I'm living a life just like everybody else is living a life, and that needs some respect too, I think allows you to kind of come back to that reality of, yes, it's a great responsibility, but at the same time, I'm trying to factor that in to the fact that it is a job and it is important. But at the same time, so is one's family, so is one's life. So it's all of that.
All that balance that everybody's trying.
I know.
Well, I walked at the beginning of COVID, cause there's always the beginning, but I was walking on the Burke Gilman Trail and I walked by, now it's the Alaska Airlines Arena, and the door was open and the women's volleyball team was in there all practicing with their masks on. And I took a picture and I was like, hey, if these athletes can practice at their level with a mask on, we can put masks on our faces. I think we have so much to learn from these kids and how much dedication they have. And, they have not had an easy road. I actually was quoted in the UW paper because it's a long story, but I think college kids have had it almost the worst during this time. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine the athletes, it's hard to have interaction taken away when you are at the literal prime of your life.
Yeah.
But having competition taken away from an athlete in college during their athletic prime is also just so brutal. And I am so thankful that they are being taken care of.
Yeah, we do our best given the circumstance and, understanding that, athletes this past 2 years have been limited in terms of when they can arrive, how they train with a mask. Imagine trying to run wind sprints with a mask on.
No, I'd Peloton with a mask on and thought I was going to die.
It feels stifling, right? Let alone trying to do that at an elite level.
Totally. That's why when I saw the volleyball players
Yeah.
practicing, I'm like, these girls are so strong.
Yeah. Or asking, we gave athletes the opportunity to opt out. And, imagine the pressure faced by an athlete is saying, do I opt out knowing that in the back end, I might not have my scholarship still, or some other person may have taken my role? Or do I opt out knowing that I might be reducing my risk to the family if I get COVID and I give it to somebody who has risk factors? I can't really even fathom some of those types of things. I mean, I think we all understand it at a certain level for the sacrifices that we ourselves have made, but I think it is different. I think it's really hard. I feel terrible for this generation of students because of how much isolation, how much separation. And college is supposed to be a fun time. And I tell people, I get it. I had plenty of fun in college.
Yeah.
And I get when people slip up because you're in that phase of life where you feel indestructible and you're amongst your peer group. But
they're like biologically programmed to need to be together. Like that is just the point.
It's the point. And when you force otherwise, it may not work that way. So it's sort of having the empathy there and trying to understand what it's like and saying, we're going to have to make some exceptions. We're going to have to be, we're going to have to accept that they're not, 40-year-old adults walking around here. Like they're 20-year-old student athletes or students, and trying to figure out a way to navigate it. It's not easy.
Well, Dr. Rao, thank you for all your thought and your leadership in the sports medicine field. I feel lucky that you are my physician. I'm claiming you as my own.
Thank you.
But to be able to have the thought to say, I'm not gonna do this other thing that could make me more money, can make me more comfortable. I'm gonna choose to be one of 30-ish professors in sports medicine in the country and start thinking about how you're going to affect change in your field and leave that legacy. I feel so proud to know you, and I'm so appreciative that you are willing to share your experiences with all of us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here and to share my story. It's not something I get to talk about all that often in a more public way. And I really appreciate the opportunity to do it.
But there's one thing that I would just be remiss if we didn't talk about, and that is your Instagram page, Welted Wear. Can we please plug it? Because it's amazing.
Yeah.
So Dr. Rao's a deeply faceted, artistic individual, which I just found out, but I'm really excited about it. So talk about it.
Yeah. So, when I was young, I did a lot of oil painting, and part of it was the idea of trying to find balance in life. And I've always been somebody who balances by doing a lot of stuff. And so I'm always balancing many things. And so, medicine can be challenging, it can be technical at times, and trying to find the counterpoint to that for me has been art. And so, for a long time that meant photography, because oil painting became harder and harder to do when I was training in medicine. And so it became photography. But as the pandemic hit, I wasn't able to get out like most people all that often and take my photos or spend time with my photo friends. And so I started developing a fashion for classic dress shoes, men's dress shoes, basically. And what really attracted
Have you always been a shoe person?
No. I was like forever a DSW, like go and whoop on a pair of crappy shoes that were glued together.
So this literally came out of nowhere?
Well, it came out of a few things. I started to have some issues with my feet, actually. And I was wearing a lot of no knock to the brand, but like it was Cole Haan. They have these shoes that look like dress shoes, but really are sneakers. Mm-hmm. And I found that standing around in those shoes all day really bugged my feet. And so I started exploring. I went to Nordstrom and picked up a pair of, $150, shoes that were dress shoes that had a leather sole. And I found, holy cow, these shoes are way more comfortable for me to wear. And I would have never imagined that, because you would imagine, hey, a pair of like Nike Airs dressed up as a dress shoe would be better. And so that got me started in terms of the practicality of it. And then as the pandemic hit, I was one of the rare people who was actually going into work to see people.
Yeah.
And everybody else was getting rid of all their good stuff. And so I started learning how to restore shoes and kind of getting interested in leather and how to sort of make it refresh again after it's been used for a while. Then that got me onto this track of getting to meet and virtually meet famous shoemakers, all of those things.
I love this.
And then at the end of the day, it became a passion of mine to like know and study and learn a lot about shoes, and it combined my photography, which now I take photos of shoes, and my extroverted nature, getting to meet and discuss shoes with some of the best shoemakers in the world, and that's been a really fun journey.
So throw out the handle.
It's Welted Wear, WELTED, and then WARE, not wear like WEAR, but WARE, Welted Wear. And welted is a reference to essentially how shoes that are more well-constructed are made. They're stitched together or built off of a welt. And a welt is essentially a way to fasten the sole to the rest of the shoe. And so every shoe that I own now, other than my athletic shoes, are welted.
And your YouTube? You're also a
also
YouTube
Welted
superstar?
Wear. Yes. I'm building that out. And again, I'm a man of many interests and hobbies, for better or for worse. And so the photography part of me wanted to understand how to present shoes in an artful way and to present information about those shoes that I was exploring myself. And so I started a YouTube channel to essentially inform people about some of these shoemakers and brands that I was learning about, and finding ways to connect the art to the knowledge of photography and present the shoes in a way that somebody can go to one of my videos, take a look at a pair of shoes or a brand or a shoemaker they may be interested in, and kind of get a sense for what that shoe looks and feels like. That's not just a photograph, but is somebody talking about the shoe, presenting the shoes via video clips, as well as zoom ins on shoe, so take a look at my YouTube. That's where I'm really working on from a hobbyist standpoint right now.
It is just so cool. I love it.
Thank
you so much for giving your time. Thank you for educating me and for being a force of change.
Well, thank you for recognizing it, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Dr. Rao is so much more than a physician. He's a visionary. I've heard him described by his peers as a, quote, legend, a genius, and the coolest person ever. True story. Words used by doctors, his peers, about this man. He's made a career choice reflective of his values and continued learning in his own right with Welted Wear. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Dr. Rao, you're making the world a better place, and we are all better for it. Thank you so much for sharing yourself. Now, all of you out there, please share this podcast with anyone you think would love it. Please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and find me on the socials. I'm on Instagram at Right in Front of My Face, on Twitter at In Front of My Face. Keep asking questions to people you meet. You never know what's going on right in front of your face.